Hey, Jesse. I think you might be muted.
Hey, I was muted, guys. Thanks, man.
I was trying to figure out what that was.
I was hearing loud typing. And so you're probably going like, dude, pay attention. All right, guys, welcome to today's Permaculture Masterclass, where we dive deep into the many rabbit holes that permaculture opens. Just as the permaculture enthusiast eventually takes a PDC, the PDC graduate eventually goes deeper to levels of mastery and proficiency beyond the PDC. Today, we are honored to welcome Don Hall. Don is the founder of Evolutionary Change and author of The Regeneration Handbook: Transform Yourself to Transform the World. He has served in a variety of capacities throughout the international transition towns movement over the past 15 years. First as education and outreach coordinator for Transition Colorado, then as founder and executive director of Transition Sarasota, Florida, and executive director of Transition US. He currently serves as a transition coordinator for the International Transition Network. Don holds a master's in environmental leadership from Naropa University, a certification of permaculture design in Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, and regularly teaches on a wide variety of topics, including leadership development, community organization, effective collaboration, and local food systems. In 2019, Don edited and published 10 stories of transition in the U.S., inspiring examples of community resilience building, which I'll put in the chat, and he currently lives in community in Boulder, Colorado. Don, we're so pleased to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yes, this is going to be a great conversation. We were chatting a little bit before, but anybody into permaculture, of course, is, I think, probably familiar with the transition towns movement. But we may have, like I was telling Don earlier, I kind of was tapped into that for a while, and I sort of lost sort of my focus on it. So it's going to be great to sort of like see where things stand currently, what's new, what successes have been out there. But first, Don, just by way of getting to know you a little bit better, where did you first sort of like, where did the permaculture word or the transition town word sort of like become a little germinated seed in your life? What were you doing before that, and when did that transition happen, and then how did that sort of branch out into where you are now, an author and really an expert in the transition towns movement?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to say that I'm an expert because I'm not sure that anybody's an expert on this. We're all learning as we go here.
Yes.
But yeah, I got involved in activism in college, first through the Students for Free Tibet, and then anti-war and anti-globalization movements of the early 2000s, and got involved more and more with climate action. Volunteered with an organization called the Sarasota Network for Climate Action in Sarasota, Florida, and yeah, I felt like that was where I wanted to focus my energies, as perhaps the biggest and most profound issue that humanity is facing at this point. But I wasn't. Yeah, I became more and more disenchanted with political activism. Not that I don't think it's important, but my heart wasn't really in it. The kind of single issue focus, um, the kind of oppositional um, approach. I was looking for something different that was more in accordance with my own personal values and my own spiritual path. And so I went to graduate school at Naropa University here in Boulder, Colorado, for environmental leadership. And at that point, stumbled across both permaculture and transition right around the same time, and felt like, yeah, this is what I've been looking for. This is something that I can really dive into with my whole being and work for.
Yeah, that makes sense completely. Tell me a little bit about Naropa. I'm familiar with it by name and reputation, but what sort of things do they offer? Do they offer permaculture courses, transition town courses, or is it more like part of the coursework?
Yeah, well, Naropa is a small Buddhist university
Hmm.
located here in Boulder. It was started by a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and it was originally the Naropa Institute. But when it became accredited as a full university, it became Naropa University. And there's a lot of Buddhist studies, a lot of great psychology programs. They do offer permaculture courses, permaculture teaching to undergraduate students, and the graduate level environmental leadership program, which I was a part of, which unfortunately no longer exists. A lot of different topics like systems thinking, environmental justice, inner work for environmental leaders, authentic leadership, um, different programs like that. And it was just a fantastic experience for me and really gave me the confidence and the skills to do what I'm doing today.
Absolutely. I can see why. That sort of stuff that you're just talking about seems like the most important piece to being if you're considering trying to make change in the world, even if it's just in your community, like to avoid burnout, to have designed balance into how you're trying to take on systems change seems so critical and so important. And I hope that we touch on that very piece with like what you have learned. But maybe let's take everybody here knows permaculture, of course. This is that's our primary audience, but it's possible that people are not quite familiar with transition towns and the transition town movement. So maybe you could just give a sort of general, like where they came from, what they're up to, and how they're aligned with permaculture, and then take it into where they stand currently.
Yeah, well, I put quite a bit of this information into my presentation,
Okay,
so I
maybe
may
now's the
share
time.
it again.
Or
Should I start sharing?
well, if it seems like that's the way to go, let's do that. And then if it's like, hey, we'll stop the presentation, we'll just keep chatting, we can do that
Yeah,
too. But since I unwittingly set that up, we might as well just go to the slideshow, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
we can and as people are listening live, feel free to ask questions as we go, and I will too. Don has said its interjections are fine. So we may interject here and there. Oops, excuse me, don't do that, Jesse. All right, that looks good, and that is on the screen. So go for it.
All right, great. Well, I thought it was excellent that you titled this masterclass "Becoming Effective Change Agents," because that's what really the Regeneration Handbook and my work in general has been all about. Um, I really think that, in addition to kind of top down policy efforts and individual behavior change, that one of the most important leverage points that we have at this point in time for dealing with this unprecedented global social, economic, and environmental polycrisis is grassroots activism. And really supporting people to make change in their local communities. So that's what the book is all about. That's what my work as training coordinator with Transition Network is all about. And really happy to have the opportunity to share about some of that today. Um, Yeah, I am a permaculturalist myself, and permaculture has really been one of my main sources of inspiration. I took my PDC back in 2009 at the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute in Basalt, Colorado, and have been studying and practicing permaculture ever since. This is a picture of me leading a garden tour at a little intentional community that I helped to create in Sarasota, Florida, called the Novus Community House, where we had this big, beautiful food forest in our front yard. You can see the banana trees, obviously. I think those are, what are those? They're, loofah
Oh,
on a
loofah.
trellis there.
Yeah,
What that is, and a ground cover of sweet potatoes.
that's
Um,
awesome.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
I talked with Michael's Peter Skolarski. You may know him. Uh,
Hmm. No,
And he was talking about, I think it was him who said that Jerome, or maybe it was Peter Bain, that Jerome Ostentowski has had the longest running PDC maybe in the world, but certainly in the United States. Is that your understanding as well?
that's my understanding. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
it was the first one in the U.S. and I think continues to this day.
That's amazing work.
Yeah, quite an amazing place to check out if you haven't yet. The Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute. Very
How close
easy.
is that to Boulder?
It's a few hours.
Okay,
It's on the western slope of the Rockies. We're on the eastern.
great.
But
Yep.
yeah, and I've also spoken at a lot of permaculture convergences into permaculture groups. This is a picture keynote panel on scaling up permaculture at the Florida Permaculture Convergence. I think maybe back in 2016 or 17. Um, and often when I've spoken to permaculture groups, I've really focused in on the close connection between permaculture and transition, because I think that there is a real kinship there. And I think that both of these movements, which I consider myself part of, have a lot to offer each other and could really benefit from, I think, supporting each other more. Some folks might know, some folks might not, that transition was actually founded by a permaculture teacher. The happy guy in the green shirt there is Rob Hopkins. And back in 2005, he was teaching a 2-year course in practical sustainability at Kinsale Further Education College in Ireland. And this was basically, 2-year residential permaculture course, one of the first of its kind in the world, teaching people how to grow their own food using ecological methods, renewable energy, community leadership, and natural building. So the class here built a amphitheater for the school's drama students out of entirely local materials, cordwood and other local materials.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the new school year, in the fall of 2005, I believe, Rob screened a documentary film for his students called The End of Suburbia, which you may have seen.
Yes.
And invited Dr. Colin Campbell from the Association for the Study of Peak Oil and Gas to speak to his students. And, this was a time when awareness about climate change was also skyrocketing, thanks in part to Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And a lot of people were starting to realize that these global environmental issues were not somewhere out in the distant future anymore, but were really starting to show up on our own doorstep. And so Rob and his students embarked on a project to look at their town of Kinsale, Ireland, and what they could do to build resilience now. So they looked at every aspect of their local community and established a baseline for current resilience. They visioned out into the future into 2021 to look at how their community could still be thriving with half as much oil, and backcasted what would we need to do every year to get to that vision on time. And they didn't think all that much of this. It was a school project. But the town council of Kinsale unanimously adopted it. And when it got posted online, people all over the world started contacting Rob to ask, how do you do this?
Wow.
And he had to say at the time, I don't really know, because this plan came together under such unique circumstances.
Mm.
But the following year, he moved with his family to Totnes, England, and they basically prototyped the first transition initiative, Transition Town Totnes, there.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's so crazy that the town unanimously sort of adopted that plan. I doubt that they put resources behind it, but maybe I'm wrong. But they gave it a pro forma, sort of like, we agree with this. We think this is a good sort of move. Is that kind of what happened?
I think they also did put some resources behind it. I think they did, have somebody in the local government that
Wow.
was tasked with bringing this plan forward. I don't know too much about what's happening in Kinsale now, but this is where the transition movement got its start.
That's crazy.
And since then, it's spread to over 1,000 communities in 50 countries around the world. And a lot of, permaculture ideas, skills, and solutions are directly embedded in the transition approach.
Yep.
For one thing, we share the same basic understanding of our global context, as well as a common vision for the future. We teach this in all of the introductory transition training courses called Transition Launch Training. This is David Holmgren's graph of 10,000 years of industrial ascent, of this exponential growth in energy and resource use, population and pollution and waste. They really took off with the fossil fueled industrial revolution. And then a recognition that we're starting to crash up against the natural limits of our planet, that we're in this kind of time of peak everything, where something is going to have to give, where dramatic changes are going to need to be made. And both permaculture and transition, I think, recognize that our best path forward is this path of energy descent. That we need to reduce energy and resource use dramatically, but that doesn't mean necessarily reducing our overall quality of life. That, by cultivating more sustainable, resilient, just, and regenerative local communities, we can produce more of what we need closer to home with a lower environmental footprint, and we can weather the shocks to come, whether those be from climate change, whether they be from the economic system, or whether they be from the political system, as we're seeing so much these days.
Yeah, and it's like, no matter what your future forecasting scenario, it's still the most logical and useful and maybe most purposeful or meaningful thing we could really engage in, is like, well, let's just plan for disastrous type of things. That way, at least we're not caught off guard by them, whatever they happen to be. So, I love that energy descent mindset, obviously, and sort of approach, just because it gives me the most hope in the world and in my what I'm pushing behind. It just makes me feel as if I can do something about these larger scale global systems that I really can't do much about, it seems. Absolutely.
And, it's surely better than just a full on collapse.
No doubt. Let's avoid that if we can.
Or even, some kind of, efforts to keep the techno explosion happening. I saw
Yeah.
an article yesterday about one of the leaders in the field of AI talking about that we're going to have cameras everywhere that document every aspect of human life and completely monitor
Yeah.
everyone.
Oh, wonderful. And they say it without any apprehension of like, oh, maybe this isn't a good idea. I don't know. Yeah, because part of my thinking has always been like I've been into like Nikolai Tesla and like like you hear stories about like somebody invented an engine that runs on water and whatever. And
Mhm.
I believe that there are resources like that and we can even tap into them, but the mentality has to change. Otherwise, we're just going to have the consume and destroy and like forgive the strong language here, but raping of nature and raping of these natural resources, and the surveillance state will just continue, like you said, unabated. So yay, we have free energy, I guess, but have we changed the mentality of the people in control? Have we made the world a better place for all living creatures, or have we just accelerated the oppression? So that's my pontification anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this moment is an incredible opportunity for us to rethink everything.
Right.
We don't live in the best of all possible worlds. That an energy descent or regenerative future, however we want to talk about it, could be a lot better because
Yes.
it may emphasize the things that are really important.
That's right.
Community, integrity, connection to nature, creative expression. Uh,
Privacy. Yep.
yeah,
With the AI comment, right? Like most of us value privacy from, the big tech corporations and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
yeah, and just a slower,
Mm,
simpler way of life. I think
yes.
a lot of us feel quite overwhelmed with the complexity of this world that we're creating. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of energy just to maintain what we have right now.
Amen.
So, yeah, we share this context and vision. We also share ethics, principles, and themes that, transition is definitely rooted in earth care, people care, fair share. We use many of the same permaculture principles, and often transition initiatives are addressing these same themes that we see in the permaculture flower, really looking in a holistic way at our local communities and trying to address um, every aspect of our lives because all of these systems need to transform.
Yep.
Um, what I would say is the major difference between the permaculture movement and transition is that there's a lot of amazing permaculturalists who are doing incredible work at the community level and beyond, some at national and global levels. But I think it is fair to say, by and large, the permaculture movement has focused on the level of a single site, uh, a homestead, a community garden, a food forest, a farm, where transition has also focused somewhat on those things, but our primary focus has been on how do we transition entire communities to this regenerative future. And I think that there's a lot of synergy there in terms of learning from each other, kind of what these two movements have focused on and specialize in. This is a picture I took at the Northern California um, Permaculture Convergence, which I believe that year was called the Building Resilient Communities Convergence,
Mm.
because it really was designed to bring together transition and permaculture. And that focus lasted for a number of years, which I think is a great model. I think that we are stronger together than we are apart.
And one of my favorite words I've been using a lot lately is conviviality. You don't often get conviviality when it's just you working in your forest garden, but when you start working in groups, boy, the whole mood just shifts, and the energy that you have to output seems to lessen, and the energy that you get back seems to strengthen. And part of that, I owe it to conviviality, just talking, laughing, working together and enjoying each other's company. Nothing has bonded me to people that I've never known before like that exact thing. So I think you're totally right on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, one of the genius things about the transition approach is that it focuses locally on a level where, people do feel like they have some real agency, but it also works collectively, because this stuff is so hard to do alone. We're
Absolutely.
really, um, really still the mainstream is, um, still very much on board with the dominant paradigm of the industrial growth society. And, we can often, feel very much on the fringes of that, alienated
Yeah.
from the larger society. So we have to, those connections with people of like mind and like heart, um, yeah, really essential for, um, yeah, keeping us energized and inspired and committed, and not overwhelmed and burnt out.
Yep. Yep. That's right.
So yeah, we've talked some about transition, but for those who are unfamiliar, it's international movement. Um, Transition Network here serves as the international hub and kind of support system for the movement. There's also, um, national and regional hubs in different places, but the real, the real focus of the transition movement, the kind of indivisible atom of transition, is, um, the local initiative. And, every transition initiative looks a little bit different.
Mhm.
Um, this is not a top down movement where orders come from, the global headquarters and everybody just kind of gets in line and does the same thing. It's really based on this idea, very similar to permaculture, observing your site, and letting it tell you what it wants to become.
Yeah.
In transition, we're really looking at our local community, or, what is it, what are its greatest needs? What are its greatest opportunities and resources? And what are people most interested and excited to work on?
Mm.
We let the community tell us what it wants to become, and align with that focus, um, which I think is, much more effective than trying to force a cookie cutter approach, where it doesn't really make sense. In this way, we're kind of harnessing and channeling the energy that's already there.
Yeah. So you're executive director of Transition Network currently. Is that right?
No, we actually don't. We don't have a executive director.
Okay.
We're trying to work with these more, egalitarian and distributed governance systems.
Yep.
I serve in the role of training coordinator, so I help to support. We have about, between 70 and 80, um, certified trainers all over the world, that go out there and do courses, the introductory course, Transition Launch, but then we have a Transition Thrive training that's
Mm.
more advanced. Um, we also have a Train the Trainers course. And then there's, many different trainers offer different, um, courses and workshops in local food systems and regenerative economies and inner transition and effective collaboration, working in groups together.
Mm.
So there's a lot of knowledge that's been built up and collected within the movement. And that's, I think, one of the real benefits of being a movement is that we share our knowledge with each other.
Yes.
And we all benefit from that. We don't have to continually be reinventing the wheel.
That's right. Yeah, totally. Well, I'm just reflecting here that PINA serves a very similar role for the permaculture movement insofar as we're not trying to be the top down, this is how we shall do things, but
Mhm.
more of the helping orchestrate and flow energy. Specifically, like you mentioned with hubs, we also have hubs that are still needing to be developed more, but that's where the on the ground action and the local bioregional seed networks, knowledge networks, what spreadsheets of useful businesses and that sort of thing can be really, really effective and be supercharged. And that's all just to say that, hey, I would love to keep working in partnership, organization to organization, with the transition network. I feel like maybe it's not something that PINA has done enough yet, but talking to you here, it seems like just such a natural fit. So if there's any way we can support you further, and I hope you feel likewise, we'll keep that conversation going. Um,
Yeah,
but
totally.
also, one question: is this a membership site? Do you guys mostly function? Are you seeking membership or no?
Well, we do have a global map of transition initiatives and hubs and trainers that people can just go there, put their marker down, and share
Yeah.
about what they're doing. Um, there isn't currently any formal criteria to uh, be a part of Transition Network, just that basically agree with the vision and the principles of transition. We used to have a more formal process for that. And actually, one of the requirements to become an official initiative was that 2 members of your core team have to take a permaculture design course.
Oh,
Um,
yep.
because we felt that that was so important for learning how to, do systems change and uh, in a way that's based on these kind of natural patterns that permaculture describes.
Yeah.
Um, but no, at this point, there's no official criteria to affiliate, to add yourself to the map, to call
Yeah.
yourself transition wherever. Um, where we take all comers.
Yes, no, I love that, but I also love the approach of train the trainer. So people who are like, I really want to do this, but can you give me some guidance? They get all that support, all that sort of knowledge history, just like downloaded, boom, they can hit the ground running. So that sounds like a fantastic offer that you guys have. And if anybody's listening and you're turned on by this idea, reach out, go to this website and start getting involved. Seems like a great resource. So thank you, Don. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just diving a little deeper into what transition is, um, this transition animal has become kind of the main way that we describe how transition works and what local transition initiatives do. Um, Points out what we call 7 essential ingredients of transition, and they vary a little bit. There's been, a few different variations of this, but basically, um, one of the key essential ingredients is that we understand both our global and our local context, that we understand the issues that we're responding to and how they're interconnected, so we can be as skillful as possible in addressing them. And originally, transition was mainly focused on climate change, peak oil, resource depletion, um, but over time has evolved to include a lot more issues that are part of this polycrisis, such as economic inequality and social justice, that we know that, no transition without a just transition. So that's one essential ingredient. Another one is vision, that we actually can imagine things being different, things being better, and that we have a vision that is holistic, that puts all the different pieces together in a very similar way to how permaculture does, that is positive, inspiring, but also realistic, credible, possible. We aren't talking about, pure utopian fantasies here. But where's that balance between, the highest good that we can imagine and what is really realistic, in terms of our, the Earth's resources and, who we are as human beings.
Yeah, I call it practical utopia, because obviously utopianistic visions go wrong really really often in major ways in historical sort of arc of knowledge. So we want to avoid that. But permaculture and the ecological and holistic thinking allow us a vision that is practical. It's like, oh, okay, we can actually have this much biomass on this much footprint of land and produce X amount of, fuel that we need and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I love that you said not utopian, but like a practical version of that.
And it's so important because we don't see vision in many places.
Totally.
Our politicians, from the global to the national level on down, typically don't have much of a vision for the future other than, continuing with business as usual, except maybe with some solar panels and electric cars,
Yep.
which is not a credible vision in my mind. So we need some kind of real alternative to show people that, you know, there are there is a real alternative, to business as usual,
Yep.
that we can move beyond this. As they say, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
Not for some of us.
Not for some of us.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, Also, in transition, we pay attention to the inner dimension of change, which I think is extremely important. Um, and this is unusual among, social change movements. A lot of them avoid this particular territory for, understandable reasons. But, our thoughts, our beliefs, our worldview shapes inevitably shapes what we do, and how we do it. So it is really important to reflect on those beliefs and to work with ourselves, so that we can be effective leaders in the world. That we can't just ignore that aspect of our experience. Similarly, we pay attention to the groups that we're part of. That, you know, the quality of a group's interaction, how it works together, really determines how effective that it can be in the world. If we're in a group that is, disorganized, has lots of conflict and indecision, doesn't have a common sense of its purpose, that group is not going to be very effective, and it's actually probably may do more harm than good, because it may turn people off of change making altogether. But we can learn all sorts of skills, from consensus decision making to nonviolent communication to restorative justice, and so on, that can enable us to be quite effective to actually, become more than the sum of our parts, to unleash the collective genius, we might
Yes.
say.
Yes.
Obviously, we also need to engage our community. We need to, not only work with those who already think like we do, that already hold the same beliefs, that are already sympathetic to our cause, but eventually reaching out beyond the choir to, engage people and organizations from all walks of life and bring them into a movement. Um, Perhaps most importantly, practical projects are kind of the explicit aim of all of this work, because they create real impacts, they meet real needs, they transform people's lives and enhance their local communities. But they are dependent. Their success is really dependent on all these other ingredients. So, we can't, if we just skip straight to the work, we could be missing a lot. We could be designing projects that don't work, that aren't going to be embraced by our local community, that we can't manage. But if we're able to pay attention to context, vision, intertransition, healthy groups, community engagement, then we can design practical projects that maybe start small but can scale up, get bigger and bigger over time, and eventually become strategies that change whole systems.
Yeah, they can become like magnetic attractors to people who had no other allied interest with the transition group necessarily, but all of a sudden they're seeing these beautiful changes in their community that have enough buy-in that they're maintained, and they're like you say, they can grow over time. So I think that's a critical one for gathering in those on the periphery a little bit who aren't necessarily bought into our sort of worldview yet, but can see the practical implications of it.
Yes, very much so. We have to prove that our ideas can actually work, that they can actually make people's lives better, that they can, put food on people's tables and money in their pockets and roofs over their heads.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to some real life examples of those in just a few minutes.
Perfect.
But the seventh essential ingredient is this being part of a movement, because no matter how impactful some one local transition initiative is, if we're not able to connect up the dots between maybe hundreds or thousands of these types of efforts, it's not going to amount to global change, which we also very much need. So those are all the kind of seven pieces that we want to have, the seven different parts of this transition animal that all need to kind of be working together for this animal to move and grow, and maybe even dance. But one thing that this model doesn't do is talk about how these things change over time.
Mm.
How does community engagement look like in the beginning of the transition process, and what does it look like later? How do our groups look like when we're just starting out? What are the kinds of things we need to pay attention to? And then, how might they change and grow and expand as this process goes on? Obviously, the same for practical projects. So I've been working with this other model called the 5 stages of transition that came from transition movement founder Rob Hopkins in his 2011 book, The Transition Companion, but were mostly overlooked at the time. This transition companion presented 64 different tools and ingredients for transition. And I think that was just too much for people to absorb. But these tools and ingredients were also organized into these 5 stages of development, which were less meant as a theory of how transition works, a kind of theory of change, as a description of how it unfolds in local communities. And I found that really to be true with my experience doing transition on the ground in Sarasota, Florida. So the 5 stages, appropriately enough, start with starting out. And this is about, basically trying our best ideas out in the community and seeing what sticks. Typically begins with gathering together an initiating group, maybe 5 to 8 people who are really excited about the transition idea and are committed to helping this thing get off the ground. It's called an initiating group because it's not necessarily the same people that are going to be running this down the line. The idea is not to build a little territory or power base for ourselves, but just to have a group of people who can help get this thing going and see where it goes from there. And, after that initiating group is set up, then we're offering different awareness raising activities. So those could be educational events, community dialogues, what we call reskilling workshops, tabling at community festivals, all sorts of things to kind of raise the flag of transition, so that those who are interested in this kind of work can see it, they can come. So we're bringing in kind of the early adopters and forming a base of support for further development. And we did this with Transition Sarasota. We offered dozens of different educational events in our first couple of years. This is one called the Economics of Happiness Summit.
Nice.
And we screened from Local Futures, this film called The Economics of Happiness, showing all these great local sustainable economic innovations from around the world. And then we had a World Cafe discussion afterwards to ask people, what do you think about this? Which ones of these solutions do you think might be relevant for us here in Sarasota? And how do you see us building a more resilient and regenerative local economy here? So we did lots of different things like this, and I think that's an important thing about the awareness raising in transition is it's not just one-way communication.
Yeah,
it's really taking in feedback from the community and using that to guide our direction going forward. So that leads us to the second stage of deepening. Deepening really starts when people are starting to get tired of having the same old conversations with the same old people. And we start to realize, okay, now is the time we're ready to launch some practical projects to really show that our ideas can work out there in the real world and establish some kind of track record for doing good work. So the first practical project we launched with Transition Sarasota was called the Suncoast Gleaning Project. Continues to this day. We bring volunteers out to local farms to harvest surplus produce that the farmer can't use for whatever reason. It's not going to make it to market next week, or they're going to till that field and replant. And we go in, harvest that produce, and then donate it to local food banks and food pantries to benefit the food insecure in our community.
Cool.
And this project has been a tremendous success. We've now donated over 500,000 pounds of local produce. And that's really had a major effect uh, on our local food bank, which wasn't doing much with local produce up to that point, and has since invested millions of dollars in infrastructure and distribution for fresh produce. And also got noticed by the Florida Department of Agriculture, which was setting up pilot gleaning projects throughout the state, and used our Suncoast Gleaning Project as a model.
Cool. That's great. Hey, just on a practical note, you have volunteers sign up somehow, probably through a website or something. And then how often are people, is it every weekend through the growing season that you'll hit other farms, or what's just the total number and volume going on here?
Yeah, so when we started out, it was just one farm
Okay.
that I had worked with and that I knew had a lot of surplus produce that would just get tilled back into the soil. Um, but over the years, it's expanded to many other farms, also including farmers market produce rescue and residential fruit tree gleaning. And yeah, it really depends on the availability of the produce. Sometimes, we'll work at a particularly large farm every day for a week,
Okay.
and we'll ask volunteers to come out as much as they can. During the summer in Florida is kind of the off season. There may not be a whole lot going on except, a couple times a month, going out and harvesting some fruit trees. So
Cool.
really depends. But yeah, I mean, there's been certainly hundreds of different volunteers that have been engaged in this project. And yeah, a lot of them have formed friendships through this project and are very committed, coming back week after week after week.
Beautiful. That's great. Thank you.
So, being able to do a project like this and to show that we could make a real impact started to open the door to a third stage of connecting, um, which, we're connecting throughout this entire process. But early on, it's usually connecting with like minded individuals and groups. But once we've proven ourselves, once we've got some kind of reputation for doing good work, we can start to connect further to people who may not have already been on board with the idea, but also with funders, with media, with local businesses, with key cultural institutions, other nonprofits, and so forth.
Yep.
Um, so after the Suncoast Gleaning Project got started, uh, we noticed that a lot of groups started looking to us to serve as a focal point for the local food movement in Sarasota. And in response to that, we created Greater Sarasota's Eat Local Week, where you can see here some of the organizers of the first annual Eat Local Week in 2011 receiving a proclamation from one of our county commissioners. Every year, we bring together about 24 partners, put on about 24 events over the course of a week, um, helping to weave together the local food movement and amplify its collective voice. And we also started at the same time Greater Sarasota's Eat Local Resource Guide and Directory. So mapping the whole local food system and uh, making it easier for people who want to support local farmers or get involved with a community garden or start a garden at home, making it easier to find the resources to do that.
Yeah.
And we noticed over a period from 2011 to 2016 that the listings in our Eat Local guide grew by almost 300%. And part of that was, maybe we found a few new farms and businesses that we hadn't been aware of before, but mostly these were new businesses and organizations being created
Mm,
because of the momentum that there was at that time around local food
cool.
in this area.
Yeah.
Um, and if we can do connecting well like that, that can open another door, further door to building. This kind of connecting can bring in more resources, more expertise, more support to do really larger scale projects that start to make a serious impact on the issues that community is facing. Um, and I would say when I left Transition Sarasota in 2016 and started to work for Transition US, the national hub, we were kind of on the cusp of building, connecting and building. That um, we were starting to do some work around local investment in local food businesses with the International Soul Money Network and other kind of large systems changing projects like that. But I think we needed to do more work in connecting specifically with funders before we were able to move into the building stage fully. So I don't have any examples from Transition Sarasota in the building stage, but I do have them for other transition initiatives that have gone there. So this is the Victory Garden Initiative in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which spun off from Transition Milwaukee early on. And it started with a Memorial Day permablitz.
Nice.
So using that form of the permablitz, bringing lots of volunteers out to somebody's home, transforming it from a barren lawnscape to a abundant foodscape in a day. They started out just doing a few dozen. They've now installed over 6,000 gardens
Dude.
throughout the city of Milwaukee.
Wow.
And they run a large urban farm that does produces food and education. A lot of Milwaukee area students come through there, learn about growing food, and I think is just one of the most inspiring examples in this country that I'm aware of.
If
Just the scale of it.
is that if people wanted to look that up if they were near there, would they just look up what was it?
Victory Garden Initiative, Milwaukee.
Okay. Okay. So that's a separate.
PGI.
So it's not branded Transition Town from that perspective, or it was a branching off of the Transition Town that created it.
Yeah, it was an idea that was incubated early on within Transition Milwaukee. Transition Milwaukee actually no longer exists, but
Okay.
this Victory Garden Initiative does, and that's often how it works too. It's we're not necessarily trying to get everything to come under the banner of transition. We're just trying to act as a catalyst in communities for the great transition to happen.
Well, that's a really interesting point because then it makes me think, oh, cool, this project became its own thing, self-sustaining, doing amazing work. But then it's almost like you might just start back over. Okay, a new transition initiation group kicks around some ideas. What's next? Okay, and then some other thing that no longer is transition, it's just its own local business helping regional efforts can be birthed from that, and then it's almost like you can just continue that cycle forever. So I've never thought of transition as being like you said, just that catalyst moment that can build a very important thing in your community, and then you might have a totally new set of people start another transition catalyst moment, and then it can just grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, there's really no one right way to do it. I mean, often it happens like this, but sometimes there's transition initiatives that have as many as 20 different working groups
Right. Okay.
under their umbrella, working on food and the arts and health and transportation and the local economy. And, the core group helps to support but those working groups are mostly independent, organizing their own events and projects.
Cool.
Another example, this one from Belgium, the Liège and Transition Initiative catalyzed a project called the Liège Food Belt, which has now initiated 15 worker-owned cooperative food businesses in their region.
Cool.
Farms, breweries, wineries, granaries,
Wow.
grocery stores that stock exclusively or mostly local produce, bicycle delivery service, a land sharing service. And this has become a major priority even for the regional government in that area.
Cool.
That they're starting to support that.
Good work.
Beyond food, many transition initiatives from England to Japan have started their own community-owned renewable energy companies. So instead of large monopoly private corporations, putting up huge solar fields on, viable farmland, these groups are raising, small amounts of money from local investors, pooling it together and using it to do renewable energy projects like this one is putting photovoltaic panels on public housing to reduce the energy bills of the community's lowest income residents. And some of these are quite large. Bath and West Community Energy in England has raised to date over £22 million and on 34 different community energy projects. And whatever revenue is generated goes back to those small local investors instead of back to corporate headquarters.
That's cool. Hey, just a kind of a practical question, and I'm sure the answer is it depends. But with these transition groups, does it reach a stage often where you require staff, or at least one person to be a staff? Just for that continuity and to avoid the burnout.
Yeah, I think it is really important. I mean, most transition initiatives start off as all volunteer groups, but I think if you don't have any funding and you don't have any staff, you kind of hit a ceiling.
Yes.
Where it's certainly hard to do things like a community-owned renewable energy company that requires a legal entity. It requires some professional staff.
Insurance.
It requires that continuity, and I think even transition initiatives that are not doing projects that are quite this large really benefit from having funding for at least a part-time staff member, if not a few, just to do the day-to-day things and the kinds of things that volunteers aren't well suited for doing or can't do. And to those are the initiatives that tend to accomplish the most and tend to last.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
For sure. Another thing that transition initiatives often do is create community currencies.
Bowie bucks.
Yeah, Bowie bucks. How cool is that?
Pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot cooler than James Madison or something.
Yeah, here in Ypsilanti, we are known for the Stooges. Iggy Pop came from Ypsilanti, so we could have Iggy Bucks here, or the Stooges Bucks. That'd be pretty cool too.
Love it. Yeah, so I mean, these community currencies generate a kind of community spirit, some kind of loyalty to supporting local businesses because they can only be used at local businesses. Keep wealth circulating locally instead of being siphoned out of the community. Um, and some of these are actually have grown quite sophisticated. One that was associated with Transition Bristol, in England's second largest city, they had, millions of pounds in circulation. They had, I think, something like 500 businesses that accepted it.
Wow.
You could pay your taxes in it. You could pay your energy bills and ride the bus. You could use pay by text, get local ATM. Um,
Dang.
and they've since retired Bristol Pounds, but they're now working on the next iteration of this that's going to be called Bristol Pay. And I think it demonstrates, how we can really scale up these solutions to, to work not just for people who are actively engaged in this kind of permaculture, transition, regenerative communities work, but for everyday people, who are just concentrating on feeding their families and
Yeah.
living a decent life.
Yeah, I think local currency cuts through a lot of the political divide too, because it's like most of us, no matter where we stand politically, we want, our money to stay within the community and we want to support local businesses and like pay your taxes with local currency. I mean, that's a game changer. That's awesome.
It is, yeah. Just a couple more examples here, kind of stoke the imagination of what's possible. This is in Totnes, England, where the transition movement started. They've been working on a project for a number of years called Atmos Totnes, where they're working to uh, redevelop this defunct dairy factory right in the center of town. It's just been sitting there for a decade or more, falling apart. Some private equity company holding on to it till the value goes up enough that they want to sell it. But the community said, "Hey, we don't. That's not what we want. We want to take this and redesign it." And they, held many, many public consultation sessions, took in thousands of pieces of input, and designed a very multi-use, multifunctional plan that has, affordable green housing in it. It would create the largest arts and culture venue in that part of the country. Um, Local foods cafe, a health and wellness center, co-working space, all powered by 100% renewable energy and owned by the community itself.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really kind of hopeful development. They're still fighting the the private equity company that owns it, but it was something that was approved by, I think it was 87% of local voters,
Wow.
um, and could be a great model for communities, all around the world. I think particularly in the U.S., where developers really run the game.
Yep.
They're the ones who are shaping our future right now, and we've got to find ways like this to take our power back.
Yes. 100%.
And then last example here, Ungersheim Village in Transition. So this is a place in France where the mayor watched one of the early transition town documentaries called In Transition 1.0 and decided to rally his whole government around this idea. They created a 21-point plan and started putting it into action. A lot of amazing things. They became a fair trade town. They banned pesticides and herbicides. Um, they have now installed enough solar to power their town 5 times over.
Jeez.
So they are exporting energy to other communities. And they've used a lot of their public lands and facilities for regenerative projects like 20-acre organic farm, an eco village, and community kitchens, transformed a former mining site into a nature preserve. So I think this example illustrates what can happen when the kind of bottom up power of transition organizing meets with the kind of top down power and resources
Mm.
of local and regional governments. It's really a kind of powerful strategy.
Yeah, that's like the perfect 1-2 punch. I've often thought what how much could an ecological mayor, say somebody who's just very ecologically minded, do to affect change? And I my thought experiment was like, well, if they're not supported by like a fairly decent mass of the general population, then I imagine they can't affect a lot of positive change because they'll just meet resistance to their ideas. But it sounds like this is a good example of there was already an existing sort of power base of people involved, or at least peripherally involved in the transition town movement. And then the mayor became the mayor and was able to move the mechanisms of government.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's how democracy works, and I think why a lot of obviously there are powerful social special interests um, at national and global levels that don't want to see
Yes.
regenerative transition happen,
Right.
and you know they're lobbying and they're making campaign contributions and all sorts of things to make sure that this doesn't happen, that they hold on to the power that they currently have. But there is another reason why we may not have seen as much political progress, which is that these are some pretty radical changes, and in most places, people aren't really ready for them yet. So if we really want to see political change, it needs to come from the bottom up. It needs to come as a kind of cultural transformation.
Mm.
And I think one of the ways that that happens, one is by spreading this vision, but another is by creating these practical examples
Yeah.
of the future that we want to see, and then people get to experience and interact with them and see that they're not something to be afraid of, that they're actually these things actually work and they can make a better life. And growing the grassroots democratic support for these ideas, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
So those are some kind of building examples, but there's this fifth stage of daring to dream, which is all about how do we really change the world actually, and I think it's you know uh, about it's a lot of different things, but it's about creating these kind of grassroots movements, building alternatives, and getting more and more people on board, connecting the dots between them to show a bigger picture. And I think if we could do that, if we could have, say, 500, whether they're transition or not, it doesn't really matter that much. 500 of these initiatives thriving at the building stage around the country, and we could connect the dots between them and tell a bigger story. I think people would start to notice, with so much dysfunctional in our world today, here's something that's really working and gaining momentum and really providing a lot of real benefit. We might be able to, because these days, transition, permaculture, regenerative communities, this is mostly, all below the radar of most people. So how do we make it really truly visible? And from there to give people confidence in this approach. And as our current systems continue to break down and more people start seeking out alternatives, I think that does give us a chance that we choose a regenerative path instead of, say the dark path of authoritarianism and scapegoating and magical thinking, and that only seems like too much of a possibility these days.
Yeah, yes, it does. So maybe you're going to get there, but do we have those 500 groups in the building phase, would you say? Or is that like just a general sort of horizon point to like shoot for in the next maybe decade or 5 years or something?
Yeah, I would say more of a place to shoot for. I mean, there are, as I said before, about 1,000 different transition groups around the world. And I would say, there's some percentage of them that are thriving at that building stage, others at, earlier stages in this process. So we need to, I think, both help more of these initiatives to form, but also to provide the support and the training and all of that that helps these groups scale up further.
Yeah, 100%. Because oh man, there's so many things I want to talk about, and I don't want to step on your toes of what's coming up next. But one of the
Only got a
things
few more slides, so
only got a few more. Okay. Well, then I'll just save it because I'm curious what you have planned for us because it may answer my question. So keep going.
okay. Yeah, so I think this is good news that this movement has spread as far as it has. I mean, we have a lot more work to do, but it shows that there's quite a bit of interest in this. And as we know, transition is just a small part of a much larger movement of movements all over the world. Um, in 2007, when Paul Hawkins spoke at the Bioneers Conference, he estimated there were 130,000 different groups around the world working for social and environmental justice at that time. And subsequently, he created this website called Wiser Earth and then wiser.org that cataloged 114,000 such groups before it shut down in 2014. So the number is probably much higher than that. But as Paul Hawken has said, this is the largest movement in the history of the world, but most people are unaware of it because it doesn't come under one single umbrella. It doesn't have one single charismatic leader.
Right. Which is its strength too, because once you get one charismatic leader, you're in cult territory, or somebody wants to assassinate them.
Too true. Yeah, no, I absolutely think that that's a strength. I think that's how it needs to be. But we can still continue to connect the dots here between, all these different things that are happening, and particularly to support each other, to see ourselves as part of a movement of movements, and to support those other movements that are, closest to us. And I think, it's hard to say of two movements that are more closely aligned with each other, historically in terms of their philosophy and what they do as transition and permaculture.
Yep.
And here we come back to Rob Hopkins. I think he's.
Oh, is that him?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Rob. This is a more recent picture. I think he's aged a little bit from all his time traveling. But still looking good in his spacesuit here. And yeah, I think he's making an important point here, which is that, we really have to think about, how can we win the future? How can we make sure that this crisis that we're in the midst of, that's, only accelerating, could lead to positive transformation, could lead to a more just, sustainable, and regenerative world? Because the opposite is also a real possibility, and it's there's so many different things that we all can do, and we can't do everything. So I always talk about, really, before we look outside and say, what is the best thing that we possibly can do? What is going to make the most impact? Scientifically, mathematically, to really look within and say, what do I feel most called to contribute in these times of great transition, and to focus on that, because that's where we have the most passion, the most energy, where we, have the most creative ideas, and where we're willing to go the extra mile.
Yes.
And one of the great benefits of human diversity is that we're drawn to different things. So I think we don't necessarily have to worry about what the best thing to do is, as long as we're doing what's ours to do. But I think for some of us, we do need to think about, the strategy. What is our end game here? And how can we really bring about this future that we need and long for?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that, if people feel inspired to dive deeper into, the stuff around transition, around community scale, activism, regeneration, just 3 links. One is Transition Network. One is a link to New Society Publishers, which is my publisher, where you can get the book. Please don't buy it from Amazon.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos already has plenty of money.
Yeah, help out New Society.
And evolutionarychange.org is my new website, where I'm posting events and blog posts and other news and resources. And all 3 of these links have, just open up to a whole world of different resources and connections and threads that you can follow.
Yes.
And I guess I had one last thing that I wanted to do, which was just read a very short quote. Maybe I'll take I'll leave this up for a second in case people are writing down the links. But this is from the Transition Handbook. Rob Hopkins, came out in 2008, so it's 16 years old now.
Crazy.
But I think the sentiment still remains, valid. This is from a chapter on the transition concept and a section on the philosophical underpinnings of transition, which talks a lot about permaculture. It's pretty much all about permaculture. And then at the end of the section, he says, where is it here? He says peak oil, but, I think we could say transition, or, the times we're living in, to me, are a call to the bodgers and chairmakers in the woods, the market gardeners and the orchardists up misty rural lanes, the small-scale wind installers on the windswept highlands, to bring all the wonderful skills they have accumulated, the insights they have obtained through years of practice and contemplation, back to where the mass of the population is starting to realize things are not right. It is a call to learn new ways of communicating with the mainstream and with an ethic of service to seek to engage with others on an unprecedented scale.
Beautiful. I hear the call. I feel the call, and I'm sure others do as well. Let me transition back to this. Yeah. So that was a great choice quote, I think. Very choice quote, very evocative. Just a couple, and if anybody's in the chat and you have any questions or comments for Don, feel free to leave them right now. And Don has a little bit of extra time, I think, for us. So we'll keep going here for a little bit more, but I won't keep you too much longer, Don. That was a really excellent overview. It made it very, very clear what the process of starting a transition town in your community might entail. And it just seems like a very low achievable bar. Like, okay, I could do that. Me and my friends we could get that started, But then also I love some of those larger scale examples where it's like, now we have X number of worker owned businesses in our town that weren't there before. Or like your work in Sarasota, it's like it almost opened up the new market of like regenerative agriculture businesses and peripherally related to a degree. I know there's other aspects going on, but it really gives you a vision of like, wow, what could my town become? What could my bioregion become if I just did what was mine to do? And I really like that piece you threaded in there as well. My teacher, Larry Santoyo, excellent permaculture teacher, would often say, what are you going to bring to the table? Like permaculture is like, you could do all these things and look at all these cool things, but like, there's only a few of those that is in your perfect Venn diagram where it's like, that's my passion and my skills and my interest, and boom, I could go on that. I could just keep churning on those energy sort of reserves because I have that passion there. And if everybody's doing that, like you said, if it's a movement of movements, well, then we've got the power, we've got the numbers. We just don't always see it. We just don't always realize it's not just me alone doing this, or it's not just me and my buddies in my town. So thank you for that. I did want to double tap a little bit into the transform yourself part, especially knowing that you came from Naropa and maybe the Buddhist sort of transition, sort of tradition a little bit as well. When you think of transforming yourself to transform the world, are you giving practical, like try to meditate 20 minutes a day, do forest bathing? Like, is there practical skills about how to do that inner work? Because I think sometimes people think inner work or spiritual work, it just becomes nebulous. You're like, well, what do I do exactly? So I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah. I think it's an incredibly important area of inquiry for us all. When the inner transition started to become an aspect of the transition movement, it wasn't originally. But it came in very early on. I think there's a great video online about the history of the inner in transition. And this woman, Hilary Prentice, who's an eco-psychologist, said that she had gone to some of the early transition town taughtness events. And she said that some of the speakers presented a quite dim view of what humanity is capable of. They were saying things like, oh, well, we just have to wait for everything to collapse to change because people are not good at being proactive, right. Which is partially true.
Yeah.
I mean, hard to entirely deny that, but her epiphany was, this movement could really use some inner transition work. And, from that time on, it's been a part of the transition movement. There was a woman named Sophie Banks who developed a lot of this. I think she, maybe others as well, were instrumental in bringing Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects into transition, which is just a fantastic and very rich resource. So that's part of it. Also psychological insights into, how people change, so that, I mean, one of the big ones is that, fear mongering is not very effective. This has been looked at again and again, and that really what um, helps to motivate a lot of people is hearing stories of things that other people have done and how it's enriched their lives as well. So they can have the confidence to say, oh, I can do that too.
Yeah.
So psychological insights are definitely part of it. We've worked with addictions models, such as Carlo Di Clemente's stages of change, to think about, how do we, organize a kind of program of activities that meets people at each stage, whether they're what's called pre-contemplative. They're not really even thinking about this stuff, or they're in some kind of deep denial, to people who are starting to contemplate getting involved, people who are in a preparation stage, people who are doing this work so that we don't get burnt out, that we have celebration and recognition and times for reflection. So a lot of this is, kind of built in throughout, even the kind of more external strategies of transition. But I think, there's so much that you can bring into this. I mean, I think mindfulness and awareness meditation is incredibly powerful tool. It's something I've been doing for more than 2 decades, and definitely has helped to make me, not only a better person, but a better leader, a better activist and organizer. And I think, there's a lot of different pieces to this. I think, learning how to tap into one's own sense of purpose is an important aspect of this. Shifting paradigms, being able to critically see the kinds of beliefs and ideas that are ingrained into us by the industrial growth society, and to be skeptical, to investigate those, and maybe adopt more life-serving beliefs. And then, a number of different, burnout is a major topic throughout the activist world. And there's people doing great work around that in transition. And something I also have written about in the book, and there's a couple very specific tools there that people can use.
Okay, that's really cool, and thank you for saying that. I have a couple. See if I can keep these threads together here. But a couple things. My background was in therapy and coping skills and helping people through traumatic moments in their life and depression and anxiety and that sort of thing. One of the things I did not know that fear mongering scientifically does not work, because that's the stick we've been hit with culturally for so long, as sort of like a little bit of that ongoing fear mongering, or almost like mind control cult techniques to keep you in your place. And I mean, at a meta level, a lot of media, a lot of culture seems to be enforcing those. We don't really want critical thinkers. We don't really want active agents of change in the world, it seems, from a cultural perspective. So that's interesting. But what I learned at some point in my career, I learned about sort of organizational psychology, which is really about high performance. And that really flipped a paradigm for me, where it seems that the research supports that humans are much more motivated by future self visions, like setting a point in a future where it's like your past is no longer determining so much like who you'll be in 6 months or a year or 2 years, but that you're setting a high, hard goal, a vision of yourself that is more positivistic, like you say. And then that in and of itself can be a high motivator for people to move beyond, their own traumas, their own history, their own insecurities or limiting beliefs. So I just wanted to put that out there because it really meshes with permaculture. It messes, I think, really well with transition, and you even have it in that the transition animal. It's like that vision is really, really important, not just for the culture, but for where you can be in your life in some short-ish period of time. So I just wanted to throw that on the pile.
Yeah.
A question I have, because this seems to come up a lot, and it came up actually in our transition town group, and it's sort of sensitive, but it's like difficult people. And in mental health, we would give people labels of like, oh, so and so just has this personality disorder, and we don't do that in our normal society. That's not cool behavior. But how do we navigate it, especially if we're in the initial stages of starting a group, and then all of a sudden maybe one member has a little bit more, they want more power, they want more control, or maybe they're somewhat emotionally manipulative, and the rest of the group, it's like, man, we're just getting started, but boom, it seems to break it apart. Do you have ideas about that in your book, or other resources that people might follow up on, just to navigate people, because people can be challenging?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You've never come across that.
Um, yeah, people are people pretty much everywhere. I do think, having the inner transition as an explicit part of transition is very helpful.
Yeah.
I think all the stuff we do around effective collaboration in healthy groups is really important. But I think, yeah, having some kind of policy guidelines around conflict resolution for your group, and also having some kind of stated principles or agreements
Mm,
that you hold in common that everybody signs on to.
yeah.
So then, if those principles or agreements are violated, you have a plan for how to deal with them. You can say, okay, we all agreed to this, that, just one kind of mundane example would be, we all agreed to share the airtime equally, that everybody's voice counts equally, that nobody is supposed to be dominating, that nobody's, pushing their ideas on the group, that we come to decisions together and everybody gets a chance to be heard.
Mm,
If somebody is repeatedly violating that, you can say, okay, these were the agreements that we all agreed to. So, how can we get this back on track, and then see if we can make a plan to do that. And if uh, the behavior persists, then maybe there's some graduated consequences leading. We don't like to do this, but eventually, if the situation is bad enough, asking the person to leave the group. Because yeah, I have seen people come in, who may have some pretty big, unresolved traumas in their lives. So, I mean, a lot of sympathy there,
yes.
but they can, one person can destroy an entire group, an entire organization. And I don't think that that's fair to the other people that are part of it. So we need to, but yeah, there need to eventually, be some kind of consequences for bad behavior, um, and we need to develop the plan before the proverbial shit hits the fan,
Yeah.
because it's very difficult to agree on those kind of systems when we're in the middle of a conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. And then, is there any work around, you mentioned group processes. Do you do things like sort of therapy adjacent, where it's like using I statements and like how best to communicate what you're trying to communicate? Do you work at that granular of a level, or is it more about like, let's make sure we have like, like the World Cafe style, let's make sure everybody gets a chance, and like quiet people are respected and heard? How do you go about the group process facilitation and training?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. I don't think we do anything, that is like group therapy. I mean, there's some work in the inner transition around, kind of uh, creating safe spaces for people to express their grief about the global situation, and I think that's really important. But I think it's also really important that we, let leave therapy to the professionals. It
Totally.
can be a really helpful thing for people, especially people who are doing this work, because it's so complex and stressful and multifaceted and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I saw this, the interpersonal dynamics and group conflict as being, probably the leading cause of death for transition and other activist groups.
Mm.
And so when I saw this guy, Nick Osborne, had created a course called Effective Groups for the Transition Network, and he was coming over here to the US to train other trainers. I jumped at that opportunity and have been teaching a version of this course that I call Effective Collaboration for over a decade now. And yeah, I think one of the most important pieces in there is nonviolent communication. I know a lot of permaculturalists study that. A lot of transition people do too. And I think it's just an incredibly useful tool for, trying to get underneath the conflict and see, what's really happening. What are the unmet needs and how can we, adjust things to make sure that everybody, feels safe and valued. Um, I've seen nonviolent communication be used in, um, yeah, less than
As
less
a
than
weapon.
manipulative ways,
Yes.
but I think that the underlying principles are
Yeah.
very sound.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
can be extremely transformative.
I agree. Yeah. Larry has actually talked about that he's like, be careful for people who weaponize nonviolent communication, because these types of things can happen. But one last thing about groups and so-called difficult people or difficult worldviews. It's almost like a clashing of worldviews. One of the other things that I've noticed, especially in the last 5 years or 10 years, is like, some people are going to be triggered by peak oil or climate change or these sort of like meta level sort of like simplified, words that are used by marketing agencies and things. And so I wonder, or like, like vaccines has a lot of like contention around it, but what we are really trying to do is be truly biodiverse, truly welcome in different worldviews and not have it be such like you have to agree with every point of view that I have in order to make this town more regenerative and more local economy based. How do you navigate that in a group? Like I'm often in the more progressive side with groups because I'm more of a permaculturist and that tends to be what folks are. But I'm a Gemini, so I don't want to divide. I want to be like, how can we bring in the
Mhm.
person who like thinks climate change is all a hoax, but actually does care about the bee loss or the butterflies or having clean water or local economy? Like, how do we work with all this? Like, it's just so bristly out there right now, but we do need to bring in these non sort of like believers, right? Speaking not to just the choir but everybody else. So how would you approach that or consider giving advice to people trying to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the transition approach is really conducive. This is a very, very difficult issue, as we know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the biggest issues in our world today.
100%.
Is this, high level polarization? It's almost like we live in different realities.
Yep.
Each side thinks the other is the embodiment of all evil. Um, so, I'm not saying that like had incredible success with this, but I think that there's at least potential. Um, and that's because we're focused, on change at the local level and about, yeah, cultivating, um, better communities. Um, I think when we can get underneath, the really polarized issues at national and international levels, guns, abortion, immigration,
Yeah.
those kinds of things, we can meet each other in person, face to face, and have a conversation about what our values are.
Mm.
And, what implications that has for the future of our local community, we can start to find a lot of common ground. And even if we disagree on those other things, yeah, we can still work together to make a better community. And I think, yeah, I'm not saying that those other issues aren't important, but um, in these political arguments and aren't consequential. But I think it's important to have some spaces like transition that are kind of depolarized zones where we
Yes.
can come together across, all sorts of different divides, and be heard and be respected, and because we can't do it, with we're not going to be able to make a great transition with half the country.
Right. Right.
It's the polarization, the division is incredibly destructive to our ability to make real progress. So we have to find some way to find common ground, and I think that's much easier at the local community level than it is on social media or in politics.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm kind of hearing there. It's almost you might have it be explicit to, the transition groups. Like this is we can talk a little bit about politics, but we're trying to be depolarized here. And so maybe there's a facilitator skill in there where it's like, okay, let's let's bring it back to our shared, desire to improve our communities for everybody
Yeah.
and keep the political conversation on the outside, just as an explicit sort of ask or guidance.
Yeah, one other thing I'd add to that is that, transition has always been nonpartisan, or non-political, but a lot of transition initiatives do work on local policy change,
Yes.
where those issues align with the greater mission of transition. So,
Yeah.
in Sarasota, we got involved with um, renegotiation of contract with our local electric utility.
Mm.
We were pushing, along with some other organizations, to remunicipalize our electricity system so that it would be under democratic control. We came very, very close, but kind of Florida Power and Light essentially kind of bought off the swing vote with this
They do.
token renewable energy and energy efficiency side agreement at the at the 11th hour, and swung that swing vote. We also worked on legalizing backyard chicken keeping, which
Yeah.
was successful, but those don't need to be political or partisan activities. It's an extension of what we stand for. This is our mission, and so that's why we're getting involved.
Yep. Absolutely. I love that. Well, this has been really awesome, Don. I'm feeling very jazzed up and energized by this conversation and the work that both these communities and movements are doing in the greater sort of ecosystem of movements towards making the world a more sane and ecological place. So I'll leave you with the last word. People go on to evolutionarychange.org to buy the book and to connect more with Don. But what would you say by way of just goodbye for now? What message would you like to leave folks with?
Well, I think we live in extraordinary times, unprecedented times in all of human history. And we all know that, but we often forget it. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that this is not just the status quo. This is not just, another year, another decade, but that, everything is on the line right now. And, that can scare us. It is, there are scary times, but I think that, now that we are reaching planetary limits and that there's no real alternative than to change this paradigm of endless exponential growth at all costs, it opens up tremendous possibilities for transformation, for creating a better society. And that, what we're seeing right now is not necessarily what we're going to see in the next 5 or 10 years, um, or even, a week after Tuesday, how fast things are changing. We may have struggled in the past, to get other people interested in this kind of work and permaculture and what we're doing. But I think that, very shortly, we're going to start to see ourselves kind of cresting the top of that hill,
Mm.
and a lot more people getting interested in alternatives, because they see that, the status quo is no longer working, it's no longer viable. And I think that the work that we do now, even if it's sometimes underappreciated and underrecognized, it's important that we keep doing it, because we need to be ready to receive, what could be a kind of tidal wave of interest
Mm.
in things like permaculture and transition. So the work that we're doing now is not lost. Um, we're kind of establishing the foundations, kind of setting the table for maybe some kind of great feast to come.
Beautiful. Well, I love that. Thank you so much for those final words and your time and attention here, Don. It was very appreciated. Thanks everybody for listening or watching, and we'll be in touch soon. And Don, let's stay in touch between our organizations as we can. Okay,
Definitely,
love that.
definitely. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.